All right, folks. Hope you're having a great day today. Today I want to take a look at one of the classics of horror, and one of the ones which you may not realize. You'll definitely have heard of this one, and you will have seen sort of modern takings of this story, but nobody's ever really done this story justice. So I want to kind of unpack it. And the story we're going to be looking at today is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which, by the way, this copy of this book I inherited from my mother, actually, when she passed away when I was in junior high. So this is her copy of the book. She signed it and such, so that's fun. Anyway, but we're taking a look at Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which again is definitely a work that you will have heard of on multiple occasions. You probably, but if you haven't read the book, you should, because no telling of this story has really done justice specifically to the creation of the creature that Frankenstein will create during the course of this story, and the sort of how he came to be and where he went and such is a very compelling story. So let's start off by looking. You probably know who Mary Shelley is. She was born in the late 1700s. She lived in the early 1800s when she was writing. This is her first story she wrote. She writes a lot more afterwards. This was famously written in the summer during the year without a summer. During the summer, they were Percy Shelley, Lord Byron, and others, famous writers, were in Geneva, Switzerland. But it was a horrible, horrible summer because of volcanic ash that had hit from a volcano elsewhere and so there really wasn't much of a summer. It was rainy, it was kind of muggy, and so forth. It was dour, and so dour kind of weather led to dour moods, and everybody sort of were telling ghost stories and stuff. And Lord Byron says, "Hey, what do you think about having each of us tell and write a ghost story?" And they said, "Okay, let's do it." And she was kind of the last one to do it. She had thought about the idea of this recent kind of scientific study that had led towards galvanism and such, and she says, "What if we used that to kind of reanimate a corpse? So that would be pretty scary." So she wakes up the following day with this feverish dream, having sort of realized the ideas of Frankenstein in a dream, and then she kind of writes them down, initially thinking it'll be just a short story, but Percy Shelley suggests it's actually more of a novel. There's more of a novel length here, so she pushes to that, and then she publishes it a couple of years later in 1818, as the first story that she's ever published. Now, she'll go on to publish other things. She's famous. We're actually going to look at another of her works, The Last Man, later. A lot of people consider Mary Shelley the first science fiction author, certainly the first modern science fiction author. Frankenstein is considered by some to be the first science fiction story. The Last Man by Mary Shelley is considered by some to be the first science fiction story. We're going to look at them both. I do consider Frankenstein to be the first science fiction story because it has what you're looking for from a science fiction story. And the main character, Victor Frankenstein, is turning towards science to do something that hadn't been done before, something that he figured out he could do with modern science. When he's at college, he's brilliant at sciences like chemistry and biology, and he's able to create new sort of scientific ways to animate life, to animate the undead and invest that with life. So it's a science fiction story, and then what does he do with that, and what are the things that come from that? It's a science fiction story in that sense. It's also a horror story, what happens from it and so forth. So it's kind of twinned. It has both sort of genres in it. But again, I would consider this to be the first science fiction story. But if you consider Last Man by Mary Shelley, which we'll be looking at in a little bit, that's fine. I'm not going to lose any sleep. But Mary Shelley is a great writer, and this story is definitely a very compelling one because of how much human drama there is in this story. And so let's unpack the story. Now, we look a little bit at Mary Shelley, and then look at how I think modern retellings of the story have just never done this story justice. So in the story in Frankenstein, it's told from multiple perspectives. It has a framing narrative. The first part of the story begins set in the future, where there's this captain of this ship up in the northern ice, and this captain is kind of obsessive to the point that he's hurting both his ship and his people with his obsessiveness. He finds this large creature out on the ice. Him and his men see it, kind of fleeing the boat, and some other people. They come across a man in a dog sled. They bring that man on board, and that man is Victor Frankenstein in a very bad condition. And Victor will be talking about and see sort of the captain's obsession, and in order to keep the captain away from this sort of obsession that he sees, that he also had himself as a younger man, he tells the captain his story so that the captain will realize this is not the right path for you to walk down. It's only going to lead to your doom and death. And those are the ones that you love. And so he begins telling the story. And then you're going to listen to his story, and then you're going to listen to the creature's narrative, and then his story again, and so forth. It's actually going to go back and forth and tell multiple narratives over the story. But the first narrative is told by the captain of the ship. And then, so you're going to start with Victor's story. Victor's going to start out a young man. You're going to read about him before he goes off to college, who his friends are, his family, and such. He goes to college where he's a bright person, and so forth, and creates this sort of new process that he discovers that will invest in inanimate life, in order to make it living. And this sort of investment that he does is scientific in nature. Now, Mary Shelley never actually says really much about what this process looks like. Modern sort of people have taken this as being sort of because she uses like the gift of life, the spark of life and stuff like that, that they've used sort of this idea of being like lightning during an electrical storm that did it, but that's not actually anything that's in the story itself. That's just a trick that people have used, and because of how popular it was, every single Frankenstein story since has done that, but that's not how it probably was done. There's no night storm top scene where he does it or anything like that. He just does it as a part of the scientific process. So anyway, he probably just does it chemically in order to create this. It's not with any magic science from lightning that happens to animate this body. So he creates the body in order to do it. He has to create, because it's the first time he's done it, a larger size body, because it's harder to do a smaller size body. So he uses larger parts. The creature's almost 8 feet tall. He does try to give the person beautiful parts, so that the body itself will actually be very, very beautiful. He doesn't want to invest his creation with an ugliness or something like that. When everything is complete and he invests it in life, the animation process itself turns this beautiful body, which 8 foot tall body of a man, into this unattractive, unappealing, dark figure. And seeing the figure animate for the first time as this sort of ugly animation, he is struck with fear, and so he actually flees the scene, and he'll faint, and it won't be for months until he recovers afterwards. He'll recover, hear about somebody from his family has died, and he'll go back to Switzerland. When he goes back to Switzerland, this is months and months later, he sees the creature leaving. He suspects that the creature killed his brother, and the creature grabs him and basically takes him up into the mountains and says, "Now let me give you a chance to tell my side of the story." And they do, and they kind of shift over to the creature side of the story. And now you're going to kind of see things from the creature side. The creature awoke by himself, without anybody to help him or to guide him. He left the house, and people all fled in horror of him and treated him with disrespect and like abused him and such. So he flees. He flees and hides in this house where he's at for months in order to get food and stuff. He grows fond of the people there. He learns how to read from the books that are there and listening to these people. He's read a lot of books. He can now speak and so forth. He actually cared for the family that he lived with, and he would do things like secretly gathering firewood for them and such. The father's blind and accepts him, but the rest of the family, upon seeing him, does not, and they treat him with great anger and disrespect, and they flee and shout at him. And the villagers and so forth, shouting at him, calling names, throwing things at him, and so forth, from a place that he had hoped to find a home, hoped to find happiness, and such, where he leaves and he flees, and he goes back to Victor Frankenstein's home, realizing that he's always going to be alone. He's never going to find happiness with humans. He's never going to find that. So he's come back to Victor Frankenstein's home. And he killed Frankenstein's brother in order to bring Frankenstein back, because otherwise he wasn't going to be able to do it. And what he wants to get from Victor Frankenstein is a bride. And he says, if you make for me a woman companion, then I will. The two of us will leave. We'll go to we'll go out to South America. You'll never hear from us, and the world will never hear from us again. We'll just go out there and be on our own. And that's what he's basically looking for. He's looking for a partner. He has this line that I think is particularly evocative that Shelley writes, where he says, "You might have intended me to be your Adam, but instead I'm your fallen angel. I'm your Lucifer." You can tell that he's more red and such now. Anyway, Victor Frankenstein, he threatens Frankenstein, says, "If not, I'll take this out against your future happiness, or remove your future happiness from you and such." So Victor Frankenstein goes out. He starts to do this. He starts to create a bride for his created creature. Now, the bride that he sets out to create, ultimately he realizes he starts to get some a pangs of consciousness. It's like, if I create this woman, she could be more evil than he is. I mean, he's evil, but he's not so evil that he's running around killing everybody. But she could be more evil than he is. And what if I introduce a race of these? You know, could they be able to breed and so forth? What if I am, you know, creating the end of mankind by creating this woman for him to, you know, to breed with and such? So he destroys her corpse, but the creature sees that, comes back at him really angry, and so forth, and then says basically, your happiness has been removed from you on your wedding night. I'll basically remove all your happiness from you. And so on the wedding night, flash forward in the future, when he has gotten married to the love of his life, Elizabeth, he arms himself with pistols and all sorts of things and leaves her alone in the house so he can go and kill the monster, because he expects the monster's going to be attacking him that night and taking him out and removing that happiness. He assumed that the monster was threatening himself. Of course, the monster was not threatening himself, but his wife. And now that his wife is all alone, he kills his wife and leaves her there for him to find the next day. He'll be actually accused of her death, but he'll be exonerated from that legally, and he will be free to inherit his father's estate and such. Later on, we're going to find the two of them chasing each other and such. And due to the exposure to the weather and to other things, Frankenstein's about to die. The creature will actually board the ship in the final closing narrative, and Frankenstein will pass. And they're right there with the monster, and the monster will mourn his passing, and will say that his passing hasn't made me any happier or made me any less sad or lonely. There's just nothing for me here in this life. And he just tells the captain he'll take Frankenstein's corpse and he'll leave the world. And he takes the corpse, walks off into the ice, and is never seen from again. Presumably commits suicide. Just leaves himself up there in the north, and then freezes to death. And that's the story. And then the captain's ship comes free, and then he goes back south, having heard and heeded to the warning that Victor Frankenstein gave him. Now, a couple of interesting things. The story itself is called Frankenstein, or a Modern Prometheus. Prometheus, of course, was created was one of the created creatures in Greek mythology. As well, there's this concept of him calling himself Prometheus or Adam. The creature is never named, which is a compelling part of the story, actually. That, you know, Frankenstein never even saw fit to give his creation, an intelligent creation, a name. He was never there for it. You can imagine that things would have been very, very differently if he had been raised by Victor Frankenstein, if he'd been loved by Victor Frankenstein. He only reacts from the world with evil when he is treated evilly. And that is, to my mind, one of the most compelling pieces of this work. Frankenstein's creation, the monster itself, is never innately evil. It's evil because we treated it evilly. Now, because we treated it evilly, it becomes evil. Very much so. It's going to take out Victor Frankenstein's brother. It's going to take out Victor Frankenstein's wife on their marriage night. Although that's pretty much it. It's not like super evil. It's not running around killing a bunch of people randomly. It's not randomly killing villagers and stuff. It definitely has wants to take out Frankenstein, but that's pretty much it. It's got a hate for Frankenstein. Will take out his stuff and his people and his family and his wife, but that's pretty much it. That's where it stops. He mentions that all I want is a woman to marry, to love, and then we'll leave. We'll head out. It's a very intelligent creature, very well spoken, and so forth. So the ideas of this sort of future Frankenstein tellings, where he's kind of stupid, dumb, he's just an animated corpse that just can fight and can barely speak, if it can speak at all, and so forth. And that he was innately, that Frankenstein was there from the entire time, the animation by storm, all those sorts of things are not in Mary Shelley's book at all. And neither is this sort of character piece that studies the creature that, Frankenstein didn't even give a name to. Now, in future retellings, it's become commonplace to call the creature Frankenstein. That's not its name, but it's a sort of a fascinating. Frankenstein's creature would probably be a better name for it, or if you just want to, Prometheus or Adam. But we'll use Prometheus for the rest of this video. But Prometheus himself is very, very different than you've probably encountered. And I would recommend heavily that you go out and check out the novel. A lot of other stuff in it. Now, Mary Shelley, this is her first novel. And so she's going to spend some time writing this novel with some things that aren't directly related to the novel. She's going to talk a lot about philosophy and things like that. And there's going to be, characters talking about philosophy and people and culture and society, sometimes diverting for a few paragraphs while they do it. This is her first novel. She wants to get all her stuff in there. All the things that she thinks, all the things she wants to in there. So the novel's a little bit longer than it has to be, but it's a fast read. And for this book, this is my mom's copy, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, and it's still just about 200 pages long. You could probably cut 40 pages from it if you really wanted to remove all that philosophical stuff. It wouldn't be that much longer. And it's very short. I read it for a class I had in college at WVU called the Origins of Evil and the Study of Evil, and I chose to use this for part of my final analysis because I figured that Frankenstein would be very good at talking about evil, and it is. Specifically, that man's evil is reflected in the creature of Prometheus. So, for example, imagine if the Prometheus creature created by Frankenstein were treated differently and been accepted by the village where he lived. One can imagine that would have ended up having him end up very differently, very heroically. If the blind man who had accepted him had said, "Hey, look, I know this man might not be attractive, but he's been nice to us, he's been good to us, he's been friendly to us and such. He's a good person." You can see this story probably would have ended up very differently. Frankenstein would have, his creature would have been very heroic and would have been as an accepted member of society. And would have been a very good person. And he probably would have still been lonely, he probably still would have sought a bride, but it would have done so more from a place of compassion, from love, and such. And Frankenstein probably would have been more likely to have done it. He wouldn't have been threatened, he wouldn't have felt that he was creating a race of evil. He probably would have been more likely to have created the bride for his created one. So this story probably would have gone very differently. And ultimately the Frankenstein monster and his bride probably would have lived very happily in villages and stuff there in the local area in Central Europe. So this story has that compelling part to it, that there's this what if to it and such. But again, this sort of central idea of the monster that was created by Frankenstein as a monster is on its creation is not one that has been is one that's been sort of told over and over and over again, but it's not true. His creature is not a monster. It's not Frankenstein's monster. It's Frankenstein's creature. It's his created one. And again, he was hopefully aiming for an Adam, but he wound up with a fallen angel only because of how we treated it. We treated it with disrespect. We were yelling at it. We were cursing at it. We were throwing things at it, spitting at it. So of course it's going to turn around and treat us evilly. It didn't have somebody to raise it. It was raised on its own. And even though it was raised on its own, it still sought to help us out until we turned on it evilly. And I think this is a key point that you need to understand in order to understand this novel and to understand where this is coming from. Now again, I consider this to be the first modern science fiction story. If you don't, that's fine. It's certainly very, very much evocative thing. If you've never seen it, hey, go check it out. It's not going to be a hard read. Like I said, my mom's copy, even with the extra stuff that Shelley adds to its 200-some pages, it's not going to be hard to read. I've read it from my Problem of Evil class at WVU as a part of my final project for that class. It's good stuff. It's incredibly evocative. She writes a better story than anybody has ever done on film. So I don't know that anybody would ever be able to do this story justice on film based on the fact that nobody has ever really done so thus far. And giving Frankenstein's creature that he created the ability to have an element of humanity, an element of respect, an element, characterization, and to be a creature of sympathy as a result of this story is not one I've seen anybody really even try to do, let alone succeed at. So, again, well, that's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein for you. It's a classic. You've heard of it. Even if you've read it, you probably have an opinion on it. Do you think that my own is correct? That it's just so much better than any other somebody coming to it. It has these added layers to it, this added level of interest. It's just well written and such. Do you also agree with me that sometimes Mary Shelley will go off into like a philosophical or sociological tangent for a few pages and then come back? Because again, this is her first story. She really wants to put everything she has into it. I think that she does that a few places. Anyway, do you think that's so too? If so, I'd love to hear about in the comments below what you think of it. If you've never read it, I'm sure you've heard of it. But if you've never read it, trust me, you know how you hear it's so much better than the X that it was based on? It's massively true in this case. You're never going to see a Frankenstein creature or character in a movie or somewhere else that does this one justice. So check it out and read it. It's only, like I said, it's a little more than 200 pages. It's not going to be that long. It's not going to keep you up all night long. And then I assume that you're not in the category of somebody who's never heard of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but if you are somebody who's never heard of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, well, this is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It's awesome. Check it out. It's both incredibly good because it's a science fiction and a horror story. So it plays into two of the three sort of places of interest for this channel. The only one that isn't is fantasy. So if you liked this review, please check it out. The subscribe button, click on that little thing. There's going to be tons more videos to come with a lot of content like this. We're going to be reviewing some of the older classics, sometimes some forgotten treasures that people may have forgotten about. You know, the passion of my collection is to go back and delve into a lot of older stuff. So please feel free to subscribe. We're going to be a lot more stuff to come, as well as in addition to some reviews, we're going to start doing some analysis and some comparisons and contrasts to various genres and older works you may not have ever heard of. So please check us out. A lot more to come. And if you watch this video, hey, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to invest in this video and in this process. And if you do any YouTube comments below, I really do appreciate it. We all have busy lives, and if you've spent a few minutes spending them with me, I really do appreciate it. So thank you for your time.